The champagne flute trembled in my hand as laughter erupted from the table behind me. Not the kind of joyful laughter you'd expect at a wedding, but the cruel, pointed kind that cuts through your chest like a blade. Sarah Mitchell had just made another comment about my discount store dress loud enough for half the reception to hear, and I could feel dozens of eyes turning toward me with that mixture of pity and superiority that wealthy people seem to perfect at events like these. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning had started innocently enough. I'd driven my modest Honda Civic through the gates of the Grand Ashford estate, parking between a Tesla and a BMW, already feeling the familiar weight of not belonging. The estate sprawled across 40 acres of manicured lawns and gardens, its neoclassical architecture gleaming white against the September sky. It was the kind of place where old money felt comfortable, and new money came to prove itself. Rebecca's wedding was everything I'd expected: extravagant, perfectly orchestrated, and populated by the same crowd we'd known in college. The difference was that while they'd all climbed their respective ladders in finance, law, and family businesses, I'd seemingly vanished into obscurity. At least, that's what they believed. I'd arrived early, hoping to find a quiet moment with Rebecca before the ceremony. Instead, I found myself cornered by Jessica Hartwell near the gift table, her voice dripping with the kind of concern that's really just thinly veiled curiosity. "Elena, darling, it's been ages. I keep meaning to ask. What exactly are you doing these days? I heard you left that little startup you were with." Her smile never wavered, but her eyes were already cataloging my appearance, making mental notes about my off-the-rack outfit and drugstore makeup. "I'm taking some time to explore different opportunities," I replied, the practiced response rolling off my tongue. It wasn't technically a lie, though it omitted the crucial detail that I'd been exploring opportunities from the executive suite of a Fortune 500 company. "Oh, how wonderful! Like a sabbatical?" Jessica's voice pitched higher, the way it always did when she sensed weakness. "Though I suppose that must be financially challenging. These days, who can afford to just not work?" Before I could respond, Sarah Mitchell appeared at Jessica's elbow, her Hermes bag tucked under her arm like a weapon. Sarah had been the queen bee of our college social circle, the daughter of a real estate mogul who'd never worked a day in her life but spoke with authority about the business world at every opportunity. "Elena, I was just telling everyone you'd be here, though I have to say I'm surprised you could make it. Wasn't sure if you'd be able to afford the travel." Sarah's laugh was bright and sharp, designed to sound playful while delivering maximum damage. "The drive wasn't too bad," I said evenly, though my jaw was beginning to ache from maintaining my smile. "Oh, you drove? Well, that's practical." Sarah's gaze swept over me again, taking in every detail of my appearance. "I love what you've done with your hair. Very natural." The conversation continued in this vein for another 10 minutes, each comment carefully crafted to reinforce the narrative they'd constructed about my life. I was the cautionary tale, the one who'd had potential but somehow squandered it, the girl who'd graduated magna cum laude with a business degree but had never quite figured out how to translate that into real success. They weren't entirely wrong about the early years. After graduation, I struggled. I'd taken a job at a small tech startup in Austin, working 18-hour days for barely enough money to cover rent and student loans. The company had been run by Marcus Chen, a brilliant programmer who understood technology but had no grasp of business operations. Within 6 months, I was essentially running everything except the actual coding, handling HR, finance, marketing, and strategic planning. The startup had been developing a revolutionary inventory management system that could integrate with any existing e-commerce platform. It was elegant, intuitive, and had the potential to save companies millions in operational costs. The problem was that Marcus had no idea how to sell it, and our tiny marketing budget meant we were constantly overshadowed by competitors with deeper pockets. I'd worked nights and weekends, reaching out to potential clients, refining our pitch, and slowly building a customer base. When Marcus finally burned out and decided to sell, I'd been the one who negotiated the acquisition deal. The buyer had been Meridian Technologies, a mid-sized software company looking to expand their enterprise solutions division. What my college friends didn't know was that the acquisition had been just the beginning. James Rodriguez, Meridian's CEO, had been impressed enough with my work that he'd offered me a position as Director of Business Development. Within a year, I'd doubled their enterprise client base. Within 2 years, I'd been promoted to VP of Operations. And 6 months ago, when James had announced his retirement, the board had offered me the CEO position. At 28, I was now running a company with 4,000 employees and annual revenue of $2.8 billion. I owned homes in Austin, San Francisco, and New York. I had a stock portfolio worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. And I was standing in a reception hall, letting Sarah Mitchell mock my hairstyle because I'd made the decision to keep my success private. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Rebecca looked radiant as she walked down the aisle, her dress a cascade of silk and pearls that probably cost more than most people's cars. Her husband, David, was a good man, a doctor from a family of doctors, solid and dependable in the way that old money appreciates. They'd met at a charity gala, bonded over their shared love of sailing, and fallen into the kind of comfortable relationship that looked perfect on paper and probably was. I found myself genuinely happy for them as they exchanged vows. Rebecca deserved happiness, and despite the superficial world she'd chosen to inhabit, she'd always been kind to me. She was one of the few people from college who'd stayed in touch without an agenda, who'd asked about my life because she actually cared about the answer. The reception was held in the estate's grand ballroom, a soaring space with crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered views of the surrounding gardens. Round tables draped in ivory linens filled the room, each one set with enough silverware to stock a small restaurant. The centerpieces were elaborate arrangements of white roses and baby's breath, probably costing more per table than I used to make in a week. I'd been seated at table 7, strategically placed far enough from the head table to avoid drawing attention but close enough to not feel completely exiled. My table mates were a mix of Rebecca's cousins and college acquaintances, most of whom I recognized but hadn't spoken to in years. The troubles started during the salad course. I'd been making polite conversation with Rebecca's cousin Michael, a perfectly nice accountant from Denver, when Sarah's voice cut through the ambient chatter. "Elena, you simply must tell us about your current situation. I was just explaining to David's sister how you've been, transitioning between opportunities." The table fell silent, forks suspended halfway to mouths. I could feel the weight of their attention, the mixture of curiosity and schadenfreude that comes when a group senses weakness. "I'm consulting," I said simply, which was technically true. "Since becoming CEO, I've been consulting with our board on strategic direction, with our clients on implementation, with our development teams on product roadmaps." "Oh, consulting," Sarah's voice practically sparkled with delight. "How entrepreneurial, though I imagine it must be a feast or famine financially speaking. 1 month you're doing well, the next you're eating ramen noodles." Laughter rippled around the table, not cruel exactly, but not kind either. It was the laughter of people who'd never worried about money, who found the idea of financial instability abstractly amusing. "I get by," I replied, taking a careful sip of my wine. It was a 2018 Chateau Margaux, probably worth more per bottle than Sarah spent on her weekly manicure. "Well, you're certainly brave," chimed in Amanda Foster, another college acquaintance who'd married into banking money. "I could never handle that kind of uncertainty. I need security, a steady paycheck, good benefits, a retirement plan." "Security is important," I agreed, not mentioning that my stock options alone were probably worth more than her husband's annual salary. The conversation moved on to other topics, vacation plans, home renovations, children's private schools, but I could feel the undercurrent of pity that had been established. I was the struggling one, the object lesson in what happened when you didn't play the game correctly. As the evening progressed, the comments became more pointed. When I mentioned that I'd been traveling for work, Sarah asked if I meant job interviews. When I complimented the wine selection, Jessica wondered aloud how I knew anything about wine, given my circumstances. Each comment was delivered with a smile, cushioned by just enough plausible deniability to maintain the veneer of politeness. The breaking point came during the dessert course. The conversation had turned to real estate, specifically the rising property values in Manhattan. Sarah had been holding forth about her recent apartment purchase, a two-bedroom on the Upper West Side that had cost her father a cool $3.2 million. Of course it's an investment, she was saying. Daddy always says Manhattan real estate is like buying gold. It just keeps appreciating. That's smart, I said, genuinely meaning it. Location is everything in real estate. Sarah's smile sharpened. Oh, are you thinking of buying? Though I suppose in your market you'd probably be looking at something more affordable, maybe Queens? Or better yet, New Jersey? The table erupted in laughter, not the gentle chuckles that had punctuated the earlier conversation, but genuine belly laughs, as if the idea of me owning property was the funniest thing they'd heard all evening. Queens has some lovely neighborhoods, I said evenly, though my hands were clenched in my lap. I'm sure it does, Sarah replied, dabbing at her eyes with her napkin, though I can't imagine leaving the city. I mean, once you've lived in Manhattan, everything else just feels so provincial. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. What Sarah didn't know was that I owned a penthouse on Fifth Avenue, directly across from Central Park. 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, with a private terrace that offered views of the reservoir. I'd bought it 18 months ago, paying cash to avoid the complications of a mortgage. The closing had been handled by the same white shoe law firm that probably managed her father's business affairs. But I said nothing. I smiled and nodded and let them believe what they wanted to believe. I told myself it didn't matter, that their opinions were irrelevant, that success didn't require an audience. But with each comment, each carefully crafted insult, I felt myself shrinking back into the insecure girl I'd been in college, the one who'd worked 2 jobs to pay for textbooks while her classmates complained about their allowances. The final straw came as we were preparing to leave. The reception was winding down, guests beginning to gather their things and say their goodbyes. I'd found Rebecca for a quiet moment, congratulating her again, and genuinely wishing her well. She'd hugged me tightly, whispering that she was glad I'd come despite everything. Despite everything? I'd asked, confused. Oh, just, Sarah mentioned you've been having a tough time lately. I'm proud of you for not letting it show. You've always been so strong. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Sarah hadn't just been making casual comments. She'd been conducting a deliberate campaign to reshape the narrative of my life. She'd been whispering to Rebecca, probably to others, painting me as a failure, a cautionary tale, someone to be pitied rather than respected. I was still processing this betrayal when Sarah herself appeared at my elbow, her voice honey-sweet and poisonous. Elena, darling, I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of speaking to my father about your situation. He's always looking for good administrative assistants, and I thought it might be perfect for you. The pay isn't amazing, but it's steady, and there are benefits. I know how important stability must be for you right now. Administrative assistant. After everything I'd accomplished, after building a career that most people could only dream of, she was offering me a job answering phones and filing papers. And she was doing it publicly, in front of a group of people who were now watching with barely concealed fascination. That's very thoughtful, I managed, my voice sounding strange and distant in my own ears. I'll have him call you next week. I'm sure he'll want to start you right away. He's very generous that way. Sarah's smile was radiant, the smile of someone who'd just performed a great act of charity. I nodded and smiled and made appropriate grateful noises, all while feeling something cold and hard settling in my chest. I'd spent 3 years building a life, creating success on my own terms, and in the space of one evening, Sarah Mitchell had managed to reduce me to exactly what I'd been trying to escape. As I walked toward the exit, I could hear them behind me, their voices carrying across the marble floors of the Grand Ashford estate. They were discussing my situation with the kind of concerned compassion that wealthy people reserved for the less fortunate. Poor Elena, they were saying. Such potential. But she just couldn't quite make it work. At least Sarah was trying to help. I paused at the entrance to the ballroom, looking back at the scene I was leaving. The crystal chandeliers cast everything in a warm golden glow. The remaining guests clustered around cocktail tables, their designer gowns and tailored suits creating a tapestry of wealth and privilege. It was beautiful and exclusive and completely disconnected from the reality of most people's lives. But it was also built on foundations that I understood better than any of them realized. The Grand Ashford Estate wasn't just a luxury hotel. It was a business, with profit margins and operational costs and strategic partnerships that determined its success or failure. And some of the valet handed me my keys with the kind of professional indifference that expensive hotels trained into their staff. My Honda Civic looked even more modest, surrounded by the fleet of luxury vehicles that dominated the estate's circular drive. A Maserati purred to life nearby, its engine note a stark contrast to my car's utilitarian hum. I slid behind the wheel, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the steering wheel. The drive home should have been a chance to decompress, to let the evening's humiliations fade into memory. Instead, I found myself replaying every moment, every carefully crafted insult, every pitying glance. The worst part wasn't even the cruelty. It was the way I'd stood there and taken it, smiling and nodding like some grateful peasant accepting charity from the nobility. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Thank you so much for coming. It meant the world to have you there. Hope you had a wonderful time." 2 hearts. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Beautiful wedding, congratulations again." Simple, polite, giving nothing away. The same mask I'd worn all evening. My apartment in downtown Austin felt like a sanctuary after the opulence of the Grand Ashford Estate. It was a converted loft in a historic building, with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered views of the city's skyline. The space was comfortable without being ostentatious, furnished with pieces I'd chosen because I loved them, not because they sent a particular message about my status. I poured myself a glass of wine, ironically, the same Chateau Margaux they'd served at the reception, and settled into my favorite armchair. The silence was a relief after hours of forced conversation and underlying tension. But even here, in my own space, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living a lie. The truth was more complicated than either version of my story suggested. I wasn't the struggling failure that Sarah Mitchell had painted me as, but I also wasn't the typical CEO that most people imagined. My path to success had been unconventional, built on a foundation of necessity rather than privilege. Growing up in a small town outside San Antonio, I'd learned early that nothing would be handed to me. My father had worked double shifts at a manufacturing plant, while my mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. They'd sacrificed everything to send me to college, believing that education was the key to breaking the cycle of financial struggle that had defined their lives. I'd thrived academically, but socially, I'd always felt like an outsider. My classmates talked casually about spring breaks in Europe and summer homes in the Hamptons, while I worked in the campus bookstore to pay for textbooks. I'd learned to navigate their world without ever truly belonging to it, developing a protective shell that let me participate without revealing too much about my background. The irony was that my outsider status had become my greatest asset in the business world. While my competitors relied on connections and family wealth, I'd built my career on pure merit. I understood both sides of the equation, the struggles of working-class employees and the pressures of executive leadership. It made me a more effective leader, though it also made me more isolated. Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams of champagne glasses and cruel laughter. I woke before dawn, my mind already churning with thoughts about the day ahead. Sundays were usually my time to decompress, to read and think and plan for the week to come. But today felt different, charged with an energy I couldn't quite name. My morning routine was simple: coffee, yoga, and a quick scan of the business news. As CEO of Meridian Technologies, I made it a point to stay informed about industry trends and competitor movements. The software industry moved at lightning speed, and falling behind could be fatal. The news was typical: another startup acquisition, a major security breach at a competitor, speculation about interest rate changes. But buried in the tech section was a small item that made me pause. Grand Ashford Estate announces major technology upgrade initiative. I clicked on the article, my interest peaked. The Grand Ashford estate was partnering with a software company to implement a comprehensive digital transformation. New inventory management systems, upgraded guest services platforms, integrated analytics across all departments. It was exactly the kind of project that Meridian specialized in. The article mentioned that the hotel's management was looking for a technology partner who could handle the scope and complexity of the project. They wanted someone with experience in hospitality systems, a track record of successful implementations, and the ability to work within the demanding timeline of a luxury property that couldn't afford extended downtime. I read the article twice, then set my phone aside and stared out the window at the Austin skyline. The city was waking up, early morning joggers appearing on the streets below. Somewhere out there, Sarah Mitchell was probably having brunch with her friends, already planning her next social gathering, her next opportunity to remind everyone of their place in the hierarchy she'd constructed. The idea that began forming in my mind was audacious, possibly foolish, but undeniably satisfying. What if I could find a way to bid on the Grand Ashford estate project? What if I could return to that pristine ballroom, not as a struggling consultant grateful for scraps, but as the CEO of the company they'd chosen to trust with their most critical systems? I spent the rest of the morning researching the estate's current technology infrastructure. As a publicly traded hospitality company, they filed regular reports that gave insights into their operational challenges. Their current systems were outdated, inefficient, and clearly straining under the demands of modern luxury hospitality. They needed exactly what Meridian could provide. By noon, I'd drafted a preliminary proposal outline. By evening, I'd contacted our head of business development to discuss the opportunity. By Monday morning, I was in a conference room with my senior team, laying out a strategy that would position Meridian as the ideal partner for the Grand Ashford Estate's transformation. It's a prestigious project, I told my team, careful to keep my tone professional. The kind of client that opens doors to the entire luxury hospitality market. If we can demonstrate our capabilities here, it could lead to contracts with similar properties across the country. Marcus Webb, our VP of Sales, leaned forward with interest. What's their timeline? Aggressive. They want to complete the entire implementation within 6 months, with minimal disruption to guest services. It's exactly the kind of challenge that showcases our rapid deployment capabilities. And the competition? Asked Jennifer Lewis, our head of technical operations. Significant. They'll be looking at all the major players in enterprise software, but I think we have advantages they might not expect. I spent the next 2 weeks immersed in the proposal, working with our teams to craft a comprehensive solution that addressed every aspect of the estate's needs. We proposed a phased implementation that would upgrade their systems incrementally, minimizing disruption while maximizing efficiency gains. Our pricing was competitive, but not desperate. We were positioning ourselves as the premium choice, not the budget option. The proposal itself was a work of art, nearly 100 pages of technical specifications, implementation timelines, and case studies from similar projects. But the real masterpiece was the presentation strategy. Instead of the typical conference room pitch, I'd arranged for the Grand Ashford Estate's executive team to visit our Austin headquarters for a full-day demonstration of our capabilities. The visit was scheduled for a Thursday in late October. I'd spent days preparing, ensuring that every detail was perfect. Our offices occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown tower, with state-of-the-art demonstration facilities and a team of engineers who could answer any technical question. We'd even arranged for lunch to be catered by one of Austin's most acclaimed restaurants. The Grand Ashford Estate sent a team of 5 executives, led by their Chief Technology Officer David Richardson. He was a sharp, no-nonsense executive in his 50s, who'd built his reputation on successful digital transformations at major hotel chains. His team included their VP of Operations, their head of guest services, and 2 senior managers responsible for different aspects of the property's technology infrastructure. The presentation went flawlessly. Our demonstration systems performed exactly as designed, our case studies resonated with their specific challenges, and our implementation timeline aligned perfectly with their business needs. By the end of the day, I could see the interest in their eyes, the recognition that we offered something their other potential partners couldn't match. "Ms. Martinez," David Richardson said as we concluded the formal presentation, I have to admit, this is impressive. Your team clearly understands the unique challenges of luxury hospitality technology. Thank you, Mr. Richardson. We've made it our specialty to understand not just the technical requirements, but the business context that drives them. I'm curious, he continued, have you had much experience with the Grand Ashford Estate specifically? You seem to understand our property unusually well. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I've had the opportunity to observe your operations firsthand. Recently, actually. I attended an event there and was struck by both the elegance of the property and the complexity of what it takes to deliver that level of service seamlessly. An event? A wedding reception. Beautiful venue, flawless execution. It made me realize how much technology sophistication is required behind the scenes to make something that complex appear effortless. Richardson nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly the kind of insight we're looking for in a partner. Someone who understands that our technology isn't just about efficiency, it's about enabling experiences that our guests will remember for a lifetime. The meeting concluded with handshakes and promises to be in touch soon. As I walked the Grand Ashford Estate team to the elevator, I felt a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with the potential contract. For the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again, confident, capable, in control. 3 days later, my assistant knocked on my office door with a smile that told me everything I needed to know. Congratulations, Ms. Martinez. The Grand Ashford Estate has accepted our proposal. Mr. Richardson wants to schedule a kickoff meeting for next week. I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself a moment of pure satisfaction. The contract was worth $2.3 million, but the real value was something money couldn't buy. The chance to return to that pristine ballroom as exactly who I was, not who others assumed me to be. The kickoff meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at the estate itself. I'd be leading a team of 6 Meridian employees, including our best systems architects and project managers. We'd spend the day touring the property, meeting with department heads, and beginning the detailed planning process that would guide the implementation. As I prepared for the meeting, I found myself thinking about clothes for the first time in years. Not because I cared about impressing anyone, but because I wanted to get the message exactly right. Professional but not ostentatious. Confident but not arrogant. I settled on a charcoal gray suit from a designer whose name Sarah Mitchell would definitely recognize, paired with understated jewelry that whispered rather than shouted about its cost. The drive to the Grand Ashford Estate felt different this time. Instead of anxiety, I felt anticipation. Instead of dreading the encounter, I was looking forward to it. My Honda Civic pulled up to the same valet station. But this time I was expected. My name on a list. My purpose clear and professional. The estate looked exactly as I remembered it. Pristine, elegant, radiating the kind of effortless luxury that only came from decades of careful cultivation. But now I saw it differently, through the lens of systems and processes and the technology infrastructure that made it all possible. I wasn't just a guest anymore. I was the expert they'd hired to make their vision a reality. The meeting was held in the executive conference room, a space I'd never seen during my previous visit. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the gardens, and the furniture was the kind of understated elegance that spoke of serious business conducted in beautiful surroundings. David Richardson was there, along with several other executives I hadn't met before. Ms. Martinez, welcome back to the Grand Ashford Estate, Richardson said, extending his hand. I hope you'll find this visit more productive than your last one. I smiled, shaking his hand firmly. I'm confident we will. Your team has given us everything we need to make this project a success. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this visit would indeed be more productive than my last one, but not necessarily in the ways they expected. Because somewhere in this building, working their shift in the restaurant or the bar or the banquet facilities, were staff members who would remember a different version of me. And when that recognition came, it would change everything. Those partnerships I knew were about to become very interesting indeed. The executive conference room hummed with productive energy as my team spread blueprints and technical specifications across the polished mahogany table. Jennifer Liu was deep in conversation with the estate's IT director about server infrastructure, while Marcus Webb discussed timeline requirements with their operations manager. I stood at the window, reviewing notes on my tablet while half listening to the technical discussions swirling around me. The Grand Ashford Estates technology challenges were more complex than I'd initially realized. Their current systems had been cobbled together over decades, each department operating with different software that rarely communicated effectively with the others. Housekeeping used one system, the restaurant another, guest services a third. The result was a maze of inefficiencies that somehow managed to function through sheer force of will and exceptional staff training. Ms. Martinez. David Richardson appeared at my elbow, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd made a good decision. I wanted to thank you personally for taking on this project. After seeing your presentation and meeting your team, I'm convinced we've chosen the right partner. We're honored by your confidence, Mr. Richardson. This is exactly the kind of transformational project that brings out the best in our capabilities. He nodded toward the activity around the conference table. Your team seems to grasp the complexity immediately. That's rare in this industry. Most technology consultants see hotels as simple retail operations. But you understand that we're really running dozens of interconnected businesses under one roof. Each department has its own rhythm and requirements, but they all need to work together seamlessly, I agreed. The guest experience depends on that coordination being invisible. Exactly. And speaking of guest experience, I hope you'll join us for lunch today. We're having it served in the Ashford Room. It's our private dining space for executive meetings. I'd like you to see how our current systems handle VIP service protocols. The Ashford Room was located on the estate's second floor, accessible through a discreet corridor that most guests never discovered. It was smaller than the main ballroom where Rebecca's wedding had been held, but equally elegant in its understated way. Rich wood paneling, oil paintings of pastoral scenes, and a magnificent chandelier that cast warm light over a table set for 12. The lunch was designed to be both a meal and a working session. The estates department heads would join us, each one ready to discuss how the new systems would impact their specific operations. It was smart planning, getting all the stakeholders together early in the process to identify potential conflicts before they became problems. As we took our seats around the table, I found myself genuinely impressed by the level of preparation. Each place setting included a detailed agenda, background information on the technical specifications we'd be discussing, and a summary of current pain points that needed addressing. This wasn't just a courtesy lunch, it was a strategic planning session disguised as hospitality. The conversation flowed easily between technical details and broader strategic considerations. The head of housekeeping wanted to know how the new inventory management system would handle the complex scheduling of room turnovers. The restaurant manager was interested in how guest preferences could be tracked across multiple dining venues. The concierge supervisor needed systems that could coordinate with external vendors for everything from theater tickets to private jet charters. I was explaining how our integrated platform could handle these diverse requirements when the conference room door opened and a server entered with the first course. He was young, probably in his early 20s, with the kind of precise movements that came from professional training. He began placing plates with practiced efficiency, starting with the guests at the far end of the table. "Ah, excellent timing," Richardson said, pausing our discussion. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Miguel Santos, one of our senior banquet servers. Miguel has been with us for 3 years and knows our service protocols better than anyone." Miguel smiled politely, continuing his work with the quiet professionalism that luxury hotels demanded. He moved around the table systematically, each plate placed with millimeter precision, water glasses refilled without being asked. When he reached my place, he set down the appetizer, a delicate arrangement of seared scallops with microgreens, and began to move on to the next guest. Then he stopped. Miguel's hand froze halfway to the water pitcher, his eyes widening with recognition. For a moment he simply stared, his professional composure cracking slightly. Then, in a voice that carried clearly across the suddenly quiet room, he said the words that would change everything. "Ms. Martinez, welcome back, CEO." The effect was immediate and electric. Every conversation around the table stopped mid-sentence. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward me, expressions ranging from confusion to curiosity to dawning realization. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds. Miguel realized his mistake immediately. His face flushed with embarrassment, and he looked like he wanted to disappear into the elegant wallpaper. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. It's perfectly fine, Miguel, I said gently, my voice steady despite the racing of my heart. How are you? I hope you've been well. Yes, ma'am, very well. Thank you for asking. He completed his service with even more precision than before, clearly mortified by his breach of protocol. David Richardson was the first to recover from the shock. CEO? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Miguel, I think there might be some confusion. But Miguel shook his head respectfully. No, sir. Ms. Martinez is the CEO of Meridian Technologies. She was featured in the business section of the Austin Chronicle last month, after the company announced their expansion into hospitality technology. I recognized her picture immediately. The silence that followed was different from the first one. This wasn't confusion. It was the sound of assumptions being rapidly recalibrated. I could see the wheels turning in Richardson's mind, connecting dots that suddenly made our proposal seem less like a coincidence and more like a strategic masterstroke. I see, Richardson said slowly. Ms. Martinez, I believe you mentioned attending an event here recently. Now I'm wondering if there might be more to that story. There was no point in deflecting anymore. Miguel's recognition had blown apart the careful professional distance I'd maintained, and trying to minimize it would only make things worse. I took a breath and decided to embrace the moment. There is, actually. I attended a wedding reception here about 6 weeks ago. As a guest, not in any professional capacity. But the experience gave me insights into your operations that proved invaluable when crafting our proposal. A wedding reception, Richardson repeated, his tone suggesting he was processing implications I couldn't quite read. And you observed our technology needs during a social event? I observed several things. The complexity of coordinating multiple service elements simultaneously, the challenge of maintaining consistent quality across different departments, the way your staff managed to deliver flawless service, despite what I could see were some underlying system limitations. Jennifer Liu, who had been watching this exchange with fascination, leaned forward. That's why your proposal was so specific about integration challenges. You weren't just theorizing, you'd actually seen them in action. Experience is the best teacher, I agreed. Seeing your operations from a guest's perspective helped us understand not just what you needed technically, but why you needed it. Richardson nodded slowly, but I could see there was more he wanted to ask. The conversation resumed, but with an undercurrent of curiosity that hadn't been there before. My team handled the technical discussions with their usual expertise, but I could feel the weight of unspoken questions from the estate staff. It was Marcus Webb who finally asked the question that was hanging in the air. Elena, I have to ask, if you were observing our operations so closely during a social event, what exactly were you looking for? The question was fair, but it opened doors I wasn't sure I wanted to walk through. How do you explain that you spent an entire evening being mocked for your perceived failures, while secretly analyzing the business processes of the venue? How do you describe the particular kind of motivation that comes from being offered a job as an administrative assistant when you're already running a billion-dollar company? I wasn't looking for anything specific, I said carefully. But when you're in the technology business, you develop a habit of noticing systems and processes wherever you go. It's an occupational hazard. That's certainly true, Richardson said with a slight smile. Though I have to say, it's the first time I've heard of someone writing a multi-million-dollar proposal based on observations made during a wedding reception. The best opportunities often come from unexpected places, I replied. Sometimes you have to be ready to see potential, where others might only see celebration. The lunch continued with a more relaxed atmosphere, but I could sense that my stock had risen considerably in the eyes of the estate's executives. The revelation of my identity had transformed me from a competent vendor into something more interesting, a strategic thinker who could see opportunities others missed. As we concluded the formal part of the meeting, Richardson pulled me aside. Ms. Martinez, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I'm impressed by your approach. Not many CEOs would take the time to personally observe a potential client's operations during their off hours. I believe in understanding my clients' worlds from the inside out, I said. You can learn a lot from watching how systems perform under real-world conditions. Indeed, and I'm curious, during your observation of our operations, did you notice anything else that might be relevant to our technology upgrade? The question was casual, but I sensed it wasn't random. Richardson was fishing for something, though I couldn't tell what. Several things, actually. Your staff's ability to coordinate complex service sequences without visible communication systems. The way information flows, or doesn't flow, between departments during high-pressure situations. The challenge of maintaining service quality when operating at capacity. All of which informed your proposal recommendations. Exactly. Understanding the human element is crucial when designing technology solutions. Systems that work beautifully in theory can fail completely if they don't account for how people actually work. Richardson nodded approvingly. That's a perspective we don't often get from technology consultants. Most of them focus on the technical specifications and assume the human factors will sort themselves out. Technology serves people, not the other way around. The best systems are the ones that make difficult jobs easier, not more complicated. As the meeting broke up, I found myself shaking hands with executives who now saw me differently. The accidental revelation had shifted the dynamic in ways I was still processing. I was no longer just the CEO of the company they'd hired. I was someone who had demonstrated genuine interest in their business beyond the immediate contract. My team gathered in the lobby as we prepared to leave. Jennifer Liu was practically bouncing with excitement. "Elena, that was amazing! The way you turned that recognition moment into a strategic advantage. It was like watching a masterclass in client relations." "I'm not sure it was entirely intentional," I admitted. "Miguel caught me off guard as much as anyone else." "But you handled it perfectly," Marcus Webb added. "You could have tried to downplay it, but instead you used it to demonstrate how thoroughly you understand their business." As we walked toward the parking area, I reflected on the unexpected turn the day had taken. Miguel's recognition had been a surprise, but not an unwelcome one. For the first time in months, I'd been seen for exactly who I was. Not the struggling consultant that Sarah Mitchell had painted me as, not the generic CEO that business magazines wrote about, but a successful professional who had earned her position through competence and insight. The drive back to Austin gave me time to think about what had just happened. The project was proceeding exactly as planned, but the personal dimension had shifted in ways I couldn't have anticipated. I was no longer operating in the shadows of my own success. I was owning it publicly, professionally, and with the confidence that came from knowing I'd earned every bit of recognition I received. But as satisfying as Miguel's recognition had been, it was only the beginning. Because somewhere in Austin, Sarah Mitchell was going about her day, completely unaware that the woman she'd offered an administrative assistant position to was about to transform the technology infrastructure of one of the city's most prestigious venues. The irony was delicious, but the real satisfaction would come from doing the job so well that it spoke for itself. Success, I'd learned, was sweetest when it was earned through competence rather than showmanship, when it came from solving real problems rather than playing social games. And this project, this chance to return to the Grand Ashford estate as exactly who I was, felt like the perfect opportunity to prove that point definitively. 3 weeks into the implementation process, I found myself back at the Grand Ashford estate for what was supposed to be a routine progress review. The project was proceeding ahead of schedule, with our teams working seamlessly alongside the estate staff to install and configure the new systems. The transformation was already visible. Inventory tracking that had once taken hours now happened in real time. Guest preferences were instantly accessible across all departments, and the coordination between services had achieved a level of efficiency that surprised even me. David Richardson had requested this particular meeting to review the guest services module, which would launch the following week. We'd gathered in the estate's business center, a smaller, more intimate space than the executive conference room, with comfortable seating arranged around a coffee table laden with technical documentation and sample reports. "The preliminary results are extraordinary," Richardson was saying, scrolling through efficiency metrics on his tablet. "Our guest satisfaction scores have improved by 15%, and that's with only half the system operational. Our staff is adapting faster than we anticipated." "Your training team deserves most of the credit," I replied, reviewing the implementation timeline. "They've been exceptional at helping people understand not just how to use the new systems, but why the changes benefit everyone." Jennifer Liu looked up from her laptop, where she'd been monitoring system performance in real time. "The integration with the concierge services has been particularly successful. They're already using the preference tracking to anticipate guest needs before they're even expressed." "That's exactly what we hoped for," Richardson said. The ability to provide personalized service at scale, it's what separates luxury hospitality from everything else. The meeting was progressing smoothly when Richardson's assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Richardson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation developing in the main lobby that requires your attention." Richardson frowned. "What kind of situation?" "There's a guest who's quite upset about her room assignment. She's demanding to speak with management, and she's being rather vocal about it." "I'll be right there," Richardson said, standing. "Ms. Martinez, please continue with your team. I'll rejoin you as soon as I can resolve this." As Richardson left, I turned back to the technical documentation, but the sound of raised voices from the lobby area was carrying through the business center's open door. The Grand Ashford estate prided itself on maintaining an atmosphere of serene elegance, so any disruption was taken seriously. "Should we close the door?" Marcus Webb asked, clearly uncomfortable with the commotion. "No, let's leave it open," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Something about the voice I could hear echoing from the lobby seemed familiar, though I couldn't place it. The shouting grew louder, and I found myself straining to make out the words. The voice was definitely familiar, sharp, imperious, with the kind of entitlement that came from never being denied anything. Where had I heard it before? Then, with a clarity that made my blood run cold, I recognized exactly whose voice it was. "This is absolutely unacceptable," Sarah Mitchell's voice carried across the marble floors with crystalline clarity. "I specifically requested the presidential suite, and you've given me some inferior accommodation. Do you have any idea who I am?" I felt my team's eyes turn toward me, clearly picking up on my sudden tension. Jennifer Liu raised an eyebrow questioningly, but I held up a hand to indicate that I needed to listen. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration," came a patient voice that I recognized as belonging to the front desk manager. "However, the presidential suite was booked months in advance for this weekend. We've placed you in our executive suite, which offers the same amenities and—" "I don't care about amenities. I care about status. My father's company has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars at this hotel over the years, and this is how you treat his daughter?" The mention of her father's company sent a jolt of recognition through me. Sarah Mitchell, daughter of Mitchell Properties, one of the largest real estate development firms in Texas. Her father's company had indeed been a client of the Grand Ashford estate for years, hosting corporate events and housing visiting executives. "Ms. Mitchell, I assure you that we value your family's relationship with the estate," the front desk manager continued. "Perhaps we could discuss some complimentary upgrades to your current suite that would make your stay more comfortable." "Complimentary upgrades?" Sarah's voice rose to a pitch that could probably be heard in the parking garage. "I don't want upgrades to an inferior room. I want the suite I requested. And I want to speak to someone who has the authority to make that happen." Marcus Webb looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Elena, should we—" "Wait," I said quietly, my mind racing. Sarah Mitchell was here, at the Grand Ashford estate during the implementation of a technology project that she had no idea I was leading. The coincidence was almost too perfect to be real. "Ma'am," the front desk manager's voice had taken on a strained quality, "I've already contacted Mr. Richardson, our general manager. He'll be with you shortly to discuss your concerns." "Mr. Richardson? Good. Finally, someone who understands customer service. I'll be waiting right here, and I expect this situation to be resolved immediately." I stood up. My decision was made. "I need to step out for a moment. Please continue reviewing the metrics. I'll be back shortly." "Elena," Jennifer Liu said, her voice concerned, "are you sure that's a good idea? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," I replied, straightening my jacket. "Just someone from my past who's about to get a very interesting surprise." I walked through the business center's doorway and into the corridor that led to the main lobby. The Grand Ashford Estate's lobby was a masterpiece of design, soaring ceilings, marble floors, and elegant seating areas that managed to feel both grand and intimate. Under normal circumstances, it was a place of hushed conversations and refined elegance. Today, it was the site of what could only be described as a scene. Sarah Mitchell stood in the center of the lobby, her designer luggage arranged around her like a fortress. She was dressed in what I immediately recognized as a Chanel suit. her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite the obvious stress she was experiencing. She looked every inch the wealthy socialite, from her Hermes bag to her Louboutin heels. She was also making a spectacle of herself in a way that would have horrified her if she could see it from the outside. "This is exactly the kind of service degradation that's ruining the hospitality industry," she was saying to anyone within earshot. "Standards are dropping everywhere, and nobody seems to care about maintaining excellence." The front desk manager, a composed woman in her 40s who I'd met during our initial site surveys, was handling the situation with admirable professionalism. "Ms. Mitchell, I understand your concerns and we're committed to ensuring your satisfaction. Mr. Richardson will be here momentarily, and I'm confident he'll be able to address your needs." "He'd better," Sarah snapped. "I'm not accustomed to being treated like some walk-in customer. My family has been coming to this hotel for decades." It was at that moment that David Richardson emerged from the elevator, his expression the carefully neutral mask that hotel managers wore when dealing with difficult guests. He spotted Sarah immediately and approached with the kind of smooth professionalism that had made him successful in luxury hospitality. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "I'm David Richardson, the general manager. I understand there's been some confusion about your accommodation." Sarah's demeanor shifted immediately. This was the authority figure she'd been demanding, someone who could solve her problem and restore her sense of proper treatment. "Mr. Richardson, thank you for coming. Yes, there's been a significant error with my room assignment." "I'd be happy to discuss the situation with you," Richardson said smoothly. "Perhaps we could step into my office where we can review your reservation details and find a solution that meets your needs." "Actually," I said, stepping forward from the corridor, "I think this conversation might be more interesting if it stayed public." The effect of my appearance was immediate and dramatic. Sarah Mitchell's perfectly composed expression cracked, her eyes widening with a mixture of shock and confusion. She looked like someone who had just seen a mirage in the desert, unsure whether what she was seeing was real or some kind of optical illusion. "Elena?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Working," I replied simply. "Mr. Richardson, I apologize for the interruption, but I believe Ms. Mitchell and I are acquainted. We went to college together." Richardson's eyes shifted between us, clearly trying to read the undercurrents of the situation. "Ms. Martinez, I didn't realize you knew Ms. Mitchell." "Oh, we know each other very well," I said, my voice carrying a warmth that didn't quite reach my eyes. "In fact, Sarah was kind enough to offer me a job just recently. An administrative assistant position with her father's company. Very thoughtful of her to think of me during my challenging times." The color drained from Sarah's face as she began to understand the implications of my presence. She looked from me to Richardson and back again, her mind clearly racing to process information that didn't fit her understanding of the world. I don't understand," she said finally. "What kind of work are you doing here?" "I'm leading the technology implementation project for the estate's digital transformation," I explained. "My company, Meridian Technologies, was selected to upgrade their entire systems infrastructure. It's a significant undertaking, the kind of project that requires extensive expertise and substantial resources." Sarah's mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish gasping for air. The woman who had spent an entire evening mocking my financial circumstances was now confronting the reality that I was the CEO of a company trusted with a multi-million-dollar project at one of the uncertain. "Elena, wait." I paused, looking back at her. For the first time since I'd known her, Sarah Mitchell looked genuinely vulnerable, stripped of the armor of privilege and assumption that had always been the most prestigious venues in the state. "Your company?" she managed to ask. "Meridian Technologies," I repeated. "I'm the CEO. We specialize in enterprise software solutions for luxury hospitality clients. The Grand Ashford Estate represents exactly the kind of transformational project that showcases our capabilities." Richardson, who had been watching this exchange with growing fascination, stepped forward. "Ms. Mitchell, it sounds like you and Ms. Martinez have quite a history. Elena has been exceptional to work with. Her insights into our operations and her team's technical expertise have exceeded all our expectations." Sarah looked like she was having trouble processing the information. "CEO," she repeated, as if the word itself was foreign to her vocabulary. That's right, I said, pulling out my business card and offering it to her. Elena Martinez, Chief Executive Officer, Meridian Technologies. Though I believe you mentioned that your father might have some administrative positions available. Should I have him call you about those opportunities? The business card hung in the air between us, a small piece of paper that represented the complete inversion of every assumption Sarah had made about my life. She stared at it as if it might explode, her carefully constructed worldview crumbling around her. I had no idea, she whispered. Of course you didn't, I said gently. You were too busy assuming that success looks exactly like what you expected it to look like. But sometimes, Sarah, the most successful people are the ones who don't need to announce their achievements to everyone in the room. The lobby had grown quiet around us, other guests and staff members clearly sensing the drama unfolding but not understanding its context. Richardson stood beside us, his professional instincts probably telling him to diffuse the situation, but his human curiosity keeping him engaged. Ms. Mitchell, he said finally, perhaps we should discuss your accommodation situation. I'm sure we can find a solution that works for everyone. Sarah nodded mutely, still staring at my business card. The fight had gone out of her completely, replaced by a bewilderment that was almost painful to watch. The woman who had spent so much energy establishing her superiority over me was now confronting the reality that her assumptions had been not just wrong, but spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong. Actually, I said, turning to Richardson, I should get back to my team. We have several more metrics to review before the guest services module goes live next week. Of course, Richardson replied. Sarah, shall we step into my office? As I turned to walk back toward the business center, I heard Sarah's voice behind me, small and protected her from uncomfortable truths. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. I was wrong about everything. Yes, I said simply, you were, but Sarah, that's not the real problem. The real problem is that you never bothered to find out who I actually was before you decided who I should be. I left her standing there in the lobby, still holding my business card, while I returned to my team and the work that had brought me back to the Grand Ashford estate as exactly who I was, successful, capable, and finally, completely visible. The completion ceremony for the Grand Ashford estate's digital transformation took place exactly 6 months after my first humiliating evening in that same ballroom. The irony wasn't lost on me as I stood before an audience of hospitality industry executives, technology leaders, and estate staff, delivering a presentation about what we'd accomplished together. The project had exceeded every benchmark we'd established. Guest satisfaction scores had reached historic highs, operational efficiency had improved by 37%, and the estate was already being featured in industry publications as a model for luxury hospitality technology integration. More importantly, the human element had flourished alongside the technological improvements. Staff morale was up, turnover was down, and the seamless coordination between departments had become a source of pride, rather than frustration. The success of this implementation, I told the assembled audience, demonstrates what's possible when technology serves people rather than replacing them. Every system we've installed was designed to enhance human capabilities, not diminish them. David Richardson stood to join me at the podium, his satisfaction evident in every gesture. Ms. Martinez and her team have delivered something truly extraordinary. This isn't just a technology upgrade, it's a transformation that will serve as our foundation for decades to come. The applause was genuine and sustained, but what struck me most was the presence of familiar faces throughout the audience. Miguel Santos sat in the front row, wearing the proud smile of someone who'd been part of something significant from the beginning. Members of my team were scattered throughout the crowd, each one beaming with the satisfaction that came from work well done. And in the back of the room, almost hidden behind a pillar, stood Rebecca Chen, no longer Rebecca from college, but Mrs. Rebecca Harrison, though she'd kept her maiden name professionally. She caught my eye and smiled, a real smile that held none of the social calculation I'd become accustomed to from our shared circle. After the formal presentation concluded and the networking reception began, Rebecca approached me with obvious purpose. Elena, I had to come see this for myself. When David Richardson mentioned that Meridian Technologies was led by someone I might know, I could hardly believe it. It's good to see you, Rebecca. Congratulations again on your marriage. How has married life been treating you? Wonderfully, thank you. But Elena, I owe you an enormous apology. I had no idea about your success, and I'm mortified by how you were treated at my wedding. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server. Not Miguel this time, but another young professional who moved with the same precision that had become the estate's hallmark. You have nothing to apologize for, Rebecca. You didn't know because I chose not to share that information. But Sarah's behavior was inexcusable. The things she said, the assumptions she made, I should have stopped it. Sarah's behavior was Sarah's responsibility, not yours. Besides, in a strange way, I'm grateful for that evening. It crystallized something important for me about authenticity and the difference between real success and performed success. Rebecca studied my face carefully. You're really not angry, even after everything that happened? Anger would be a waste of energy. I'm focused on building something meaningful, not settling old scores. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of David Richardson, accompanied by a woman I didn't recognize, tall, elegant, with the kind of confident bearing that suggested significant professional accomplishment. Elena, I'd like you to meet Dr. Patricia Thornton. She's the CEO of Pinnacle Hospitality Group. They own 17 luxury properties across the Southwest. Dr. Thornton extended her hand with a firm grip. Ms. Martinez, your reputation precedes you. David has been telling me extraordinary things about your work here, and I've been reviewing the performance metrics. Impressive doesn't begin to cover it. Thank you, Dr. Thornton. The Grand Ashford Estate was an ideal client. They understood that transformation requires commitment from every level of the organization. Which is exactly why I wanted to speak with you tonight. Pinnacle is planning a comprehensive technology upgrade across our entire portfolio. After seeing what you've accomplished here, I'd like to discuss the possibility of Meridian handling the implementation. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering timelines, scope, and the unique challenges of coordinating upgrades across multiple properties simultaneously. By the time Dr. Thornton excused herself to network with other attendees, we'd scheduled a formal presentation for the following month. 17 properties, Rebecca said once we were alone again. Elena, that's enormous. It's a significant opportunity, I agreed. The kind of project that could establish Meridian as the definitive leader in luxury hospitality technology. And it all started because you attended my wedding and decided to turn a humiliating evening into a business opportunity. Not exactly, I said, considering how to explain the journey that had brought me to this moment. It started because I finally decided to stop hiding who I was. The wedding was just the catalyst. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversation after conversation with industry leaders who wanted to understand how we'd achieved such comprehensive success. Each discussion reinforced my conviction that authenticity, being genuinely who you are rather than who others expect you to be, was not just personally satisfying, but professionally powerful. The final surprise of the evening came as the reception was winding down. I was gathering my materials and preparing to leave when a familiar voice called my name from across the nearly empty ballroom. Elena, wait! I turned to see Sarah Mitchell approaching, her steps tentative and her expression uncharacteristically uncertain. She was dressed impeccably, as always, but something fundamental had changed in her bearing. The aggressive confidence that had defined her during college and beyond had been replaced by something more thoughtful, more careful. Sarah, I'm surprised to see you here. David Richardson invited me. He thought I might be interested in learning about the project, given my family's relationship with the estate. She paused, clearly struggling with what to say next. Elena, I've been thinking about our conversation in the lobby for months now. I owe you more than just an apology. I owe you an explanation. You don't owe me anything, Sarah. No, I do. Because what I did that night at Rebecca's wedding wasn't just cruel, it was revealing. About me, I mean. About the kind of person I'd become. I waited, sensing that she needed to say whatever she'd come to say. I spent so many years defining myself by what I had rather than who I was, she continued. My father's money, my social connections, my ability to make other people feel smaller. It never occurred to me that real power comes from building something meaningful, not from tearing other people down. That's a significant realization, Sarah. It is. And it's one I might never have reached if you hadn't shown me what actual success looks like. Not the kind that requires an audience, but the kind that creates value for other people. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. Not her usual card with her father's company information, but something simpler. I've started my own consulting firm, helping small businesses navigate real estate development challenges. It's not glamorous, and it's not making me rich, but it's mine. I accepted the card, reading the simple text, Sarah Mitchell Consulting, Strategic Real Estate Advisory Services. I'm proud of you, Sarah. Starting something from scratch takes courage. It does. And Elena, I want you to know that I've learned something important from watching you succeed. The people who have real power don't need to use it to diminish others. They use it to lift people up. As Sarah walked away, I realized that her transformation was perhaps the most unexpected outcome of this entire experience. The woman who had once taken pleasure in my perceived failures had been forced to confront the shallowness of her own success, and had somehow found the strength to rebuild herself on more solid ground. The Grand Ashford Estates lobby was quiet as I made my way to the exit. The marble floors gleamed under the soft lighting, and the elegant furnishings created the same atmosphere of refined luxury that had intimidated me 6 months earlier. But now I saw it differently, not as a temple to wealth and privilege, but as a business that succeeded by creating experiences people valued. Miguel Santos was waiting by the front entrance, clearly finishing his shift. When he saw me approaching, he straightened with a smile. Ms. Martinez, congratulations on tonight's presentation. Everyone's talking about how amazing the transformation has been. Thank you, Miguel. And thank you for that moment 6 months ago when you recognized me. It changed everything. He looked confused. Ma'am? You called me CEO in front of David Richardson's team. It forced me to stop hiding who I was and start owning my success. Understanding dawned on his face. I was so embarrassed about breaking protocol, I thought I'd gotten you in trouble. Just the opposite. You gave me permission to be exactly who I was instead of who I thought others expected me to be. As I drove away from the Grand Ashford estate for what might be the last time as a consultant, I reflected on the journey that had brought me full circle. 6 months ago, I'd left this place feeling diminished and defeated, convinced that my success meant nothing if others couldn't see it. Tonight, I was leaving with the recognition that true success isn't about being seen. It's about building something meaningful and having the confidence to stand behind your work regardless of who's watching. The Pinnacle Hospitality Group contract would likely be the largest project in Meridian's history. But more than that, it represented the validation of an approach to business that I'd been developing since those early days at the struggling startup in Austin. Success wasn't about performing for an audience. It was about solving real problems for real people, and having the integrity to let the work speak for itself. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer Liu. Elena, I just got word that the Hospitality Industry magazine wants to feature the estate project as their cover story next month. They want to interview you about the integration methodology we developed. I smiled as I typed back, schedule it. It's time for our work to get the recognition it deserves. Because ultimately, that's what this entire experience had taught me. The difference between hiding your light under a bushel and letting it shine without apology. Real success wasn't about proving anything to people like Sarah Mitchell. It was about building something so substantial and meaningful that it didn't need external validation to be valuable. But sometimes, when the validation came anyway, it was pretty satisfying to accept it with grace. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.